Welcome back to Houses and Hobbits, a Boise Bros production. My name is Burke. I'm here with Ryan and Alex, as always. So we've been comparing and contrasting both Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings for quite some time now. But we didn't really focus on just our main protagonists. So I wanted to just kind of have a discussion about similarities, contrasts, ways that they kind of blend together and stay separate. So let's start with Frodo.
Good old Frodo.
Mr. Baggins.
Mr. Frodo Baggins.
The hero that doesn't want to be a hero.
He truly didn't.
Just kind of fell into his lap, all that.
Well, I was going to say, by no means of his own, he takes on a quest that he had no say in. No say in. Bilbo leaves him an evil ring that then Gandalf tells him, hey, by the way, this ring is the key to defeating the evil Dark Lord that you've never heard of, probably, because you live in, peaceful Shire, far away from the conflicts of Middle-earth.
It's kind of similar to how Stark, Jon Snow, it's kind of similar how Jon Snow, he was somewhat special, all because of his birthright.
Yeah. So the difference between them is Jon Snow was special from the very get-go, but he had no idea about it. Frodo didn't necessarily have anything special about him. He had greatness thrust upon him.
And he was never special.
No. Yeah, exactly.
He never really he never had powers
is about Frodo is the thing that makes Frodo the thing that makes Frodo wonderful in my eyes is his willingness to take this perilous quest on. Don't get me wrong. However, it's the people around him that make the quest successful. If there was no Sam, Frodo fails.
I don't think he'd even make it out of the Shire.
He wouldn't. He might have made it out of the Shire. I don't think he would have made it past Rauros, where obviously the Fellowship splits up. Once he gets lost in the Emmanuel, Smeagol freaking kills him.
Sam was the only thing protecting him from Smeagol.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because you have that whole dynamic throughout the movies and the books where Smeagol's trying to turn Frodo on Sam.
Mm-hmm. Well, and ultimately Frodo didn't have enough will with the ring too. He was getting taken over by it.
Well, when you travel with it for over a year, it just corrupting your mind constantly. I can understand how that could be a thing, especially with greater men having succumbed to its power much quicker.
Yep.
Look at Boromir.
Yep, but without Sam,
Yeah, without Sam.
Even the ring gets him at a certain point. And
that's the thing, is we talked about with probably back in the Magic episode about the ring, is the way it works is it plays on your ambitions, your desires, your whatever, and it just kind of goes to show you that hobbits who their desire is just for peace and alcohol and smoking.
So many meals a day.
And so many meals a day. They were the perfect carriers of the One Ring because of the fact that they don't have those ambitions. They don't want to conquer. They don't want to be lords and people. They don't want to do any of that.
But the premise for both shows, the reason what the protagonists are kind of fighting is the same. It's power. And so power corrupts through Lord of the Rings through the ring. Mm-hmm. Power corrupts through Game of Thrones through the thrones.
Just being power.
Yeah. So it's really cool. I think both shows definitely take that fantasy element.
So one of the things I always wanted to talk about, if I had ever just had a YouTube channel all my own, was I wanted to do a video essay on how, especially show Jon's story is kind of similar to Frodo's ending. Mm-hmm. Because, and it's one of the only reasons I actually like Jon's ending, because it does kind of have that bittersweetness that I can appreciate from Martin. It just kind of throws, his heritage, his lineage out the window, but ultimately you have Frodo and you have Jon Snow. Both of them undertake this task that if they failed it, the world as they knew it would have ended. Mm-hmm. Frodo goes and he takes the ring to Mordor and he destroys it, which is the key to getting rid of Sauron and basically any evil influence in the world, because Sauron brings all those dark creatures to himself.
And he has to refuse power.
Yeah, and he refuses the power of the ring. He does his best. Obviously, he has his moment of weakness at the very end.
Smeagol bites his finger off. Thank you, Smeagol.
Yeah, thank God. We can get into that in a second. I always love a good thing there. But then Jon Snow, where for his arc kind of goes like he's doing things for selfish reasons. He wants to go to the Night's Watch just to probably get away from like the ridicule of being Ned Stark's bastard.
And he thought it was like a heroic position.
Yeah, he thought it was a heroic thing. So by all means, like, good intentions, maybe some selfish bits in there too. But so he goes there and he finds out it's not what he originally thought, but then he makes the most of it. Mm-hmm. Like, he eventually starts to really live and die by what the Night's Watch, like by the code.
He drinks the Kool-Aid.
He drinks the Kool-Aid of the Night's Watch, which he does so much that he is willing to trick the first woman he loves by basically like going deep undercover with the wildlings and then eventually coming back and being like, hey, they're going to attack us from both sides. We need to be prepared for this, yada, yada. And so from there, he really does grow into his own. And it does make me sad because you see that kingliness about him. You do see the traits of somebody who could have been a good ruler if you know, that storyline had taken him to the Iron Throne. But so then he becomes the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and he makes one of the most difficult decisions of bringing the remaining wildlings through the wall to make sure that they're not a part of the army of the dead that eventually Westeros will have to push back, fight against. Mm-hmm. And people hate him for it, and obviously he does die. And he comes back to life, and he then renews that quest to try and get a defensible position in Winterfell. He takes that up, and he starts trying to gather allies to say, hey, listen, all of our petty squabbling, we're gonna die.
Yeah, it means
we're
nothing.
Die if we don't band together for this. And, you know, obviously the end of it, the Night King's not as big of a threat in the show as he should have been.
We'll see how the book
goes. In
goes.
my opinion, we'll see how the book goes. We'll see how all of that goes. But ultimately, when Jon Snow, after helping band the world of the living together and defeating the army of the dead, then he goes down to King's Landing with Daenerys, and eventually he has to kill Daenerys because she has become
Mad
evil.
King.
She's become the Mad King, Queen, whatever. And he kills her, and he doesn't get any thanks for that. Like, obviously, you had a lot of people under her who thought everything she did was just, and it's like, no, genocide's not really how we solve things in Westeros. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
And granted, it was very off-kilter and off-character.
No, for sure.
But again, we'll see how the book takes it.
We'll see how the book... So, but ultimately, if I can remove myself from the reasons why I don't like that, the essence of where this goes kind of is the same. So Jon does this for all of Westeros by basically stopping the army of the dead, stopping Mad Queen Daenerys. Frodo goes and he helps get rid of the ring, and he does that basically to save his homeland of the Shire, because you have that moment with Galadriel where he sees the vision of his Shire burnt to a crisp, the hobbits enslaved by orcs, all of these awful things that could happen to his homeland that he loves so much. And for both of these characters, just because they're able to save their homeland doesn't mean that it's enough for them.
Yeah.
They ultimately leave their homelands, or they go back to a place like Jon goes beyond the wall, and I like to assume that if I were in his place, I would just go beyond the wall and just never come back. I wouldn't even bother going back to the Night's Watch at that point, because there's no threat beyond the wall. Anymore. So Jon goes beyond the wall, and I almost like to think of it as the similar thing with Frodo, where he eventually sails to the Undying Lands to be just free, to help free him of the pain that he almost caused the end of the world, because in his moment of weakness, he almost took the ring for himself, and that could have doomed everything. And so he always has that burden of, I almost failed, riding on his shoulders. And that's kind of the theme it is with the ring bearers, where they were always kind of holding on to this immense power, and then because of the greatness of the One Ring, their rings eventually lost all their power, and so there was just no more point in them being there. In that, I find the bittersweetness to be similar, just because of how much these two characters sacrificed for what they loved to do this thing.
Yeah, and ultimately leaving their original homelands as well. I mean, you have to look at the conflict that, they fought against and ultimately defeated, because both worlds had this unnatural superpower. Lord of the Rings, you have Sauron, and obviously with Game of Thrones, you have the Night King. With those unnatural forces defeated, now all you have left is
petty squabbles,
settlements, and landlines and treaties, and there's always going to be conflict there, but at least it's something that wants to take over.
It's unfortunate that, and obviously that just speaks to the not very black and white world of Martin's world, in that the land of the living, yeah, sure, they banded together, but ultimately it almost has this Walking Dead feel, where it's no, you gotta fear the living more than the dead.
Yeah, true.
Because the living will still stab you in the back.
But in both endings, and this is fun, the Iron Throne and the ring both are, melted and destroyed.
Yeah.
Those symbols that were, harboring so much,
greed, power,
right,
whatever you want to call it.
Ultimately destroyed by
No, that's a very good parallel. John obviously only had a hand in the destruction of the Iron Throne because of the fact that he killed Daenerys.
Right. But I feel like the Iron Throne ending is actually... I think that's a pretty solid point that will be in the books, should they come out.
I think it should be in the books for sure.
The Iron Throne is destroyed, and whoever's on it dethroned, and never assailing to that again.
So kind of to cut away to a more side protagonist, with both of our main protagonists that we just wanted to talk about, they both have fat Sams, who Samwise and Samwell.
Samwell Tarly, Samwise Gamgee.
Now, obviously, Samwise is a little bit skinnier than Samwell, but,
True.
Same purpose.
But same purpose.
But he's also much shorter as well.
They're the bumbling but good-spirited best friend.
They're to push the protagonist along,
yeah, and
help them in their own ways.
Of course, Samwise knowing, Frodo his whole life, and then Samwell Tarly obviously meeting Jon Snow and forming a friendship despite all the
and I like that with Frodo and Sam, their friendship is already kind of established before the quest
and tested during their quest.
Well, yeah, absolutely tested during their quest, but it's already established before the quest begins, because you have the party for Bilbo, and while they're all the hobbits are there, Frodo's messing around with Sam. Oh, go ask Rosie for a dance or a drink or whatever the heck he says to her. So it's already established that he and Sam are close enough that he knows Sam's greatest desire of which woman he wants to be with. And so he can make fun of him for that. And I actually remember he throws Sam into the dance line that's going on with Rosie. So he has fun friend moments like that.
I'm not going to go too far on this, but there's also a Rose in both series, which is kind of funny. Rosie and Rose, obviously the maiden that Tyrion beds in.
Oh, you mean Roz?
Roz, excuse me, Roz.
It's
But yeah, it's fun. There's both there's even parallels there.
Yes. With Samwell, he comes from a highborn family, just like John, but he's no longer...
Sad story, Samwell.
That's a sad story with Samwell. At least with Samwise, it's just, he's kind of a forever alone hobbit. But he's a good gardener, and he's got skills that are actually worthwhile, and Samwell just reads books. Which, don't get me wrong, that's a good thing to have.
Paid off in the end.
It does pay off in the end. But with that, he's not the beloved child of his father, Lord Tarly. So he gets banished to the Night's Watch after the birth of his new brother. And with that, he loses all of his inheritance. And then he befriends Jon, which Jon...
This really stands up for him.
He really does. He finds him to be a pathetic creature at first. But when he basically sees that Sam's not even willing to stand up for himself, Jon being kind of that... got that little bit of like kingly, gotta fight for, the weak, be the shield that protects the realms of men. He steps in for Sam, and he really helps him grow a bit, and he's just kind of that awkward, bumbling character throughout the series, but he does get better, and some of that's because of Jon, some of that's because of his own purposes.
And I think he ultimately understands that he's never going to be like a top tier fighter like Jon. He really understands his place as
one of my favorite moments in season 8 is the scene where Sam gives Jorah Heartsbane, his father's Valyrian steel sword, because he knows I'm going to be out there, but I'm not going to be... Somebody who's a good fighter should have this sword, not me.
Yeah.
So I always...
Funnily enough, Jorah didn't survive that battle, but Sam did.
He did his damnedest.
He did his damnedest. And Sam we cut to.
Sam can just sit there and cry, and the
flailing in bodies.
Ignore him.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like One Piece rules where
he's so
the salt in his...
people just think he's
maybe
dead.
it's the salt in his tears. The salt.
He was crying. He was crying a lot.
He was crying
in this pile of bodies. Just
I don't mean to laugh. It's just season 8's.
Season 8. Yeah.
You know if you know.
If you know, you know.
You know.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think.
The
only other parallel I can really think of is just like they both end up with someone that either they loved beforehand or someone they grew to love. Because Sam ends up with Gilly and basically is raising 2 children.
And little Sam.
Yeah. Little Sam's obviously not his actual son.
No.
Gross stuff there, but
at least the child didn't do anything wrong.
The child didn't do anything wrong. It's a sweet
We'll see if it makes it past 15.
Jeez.
We'll see if we even get a sequel. Come on.
No, we're getting a prequel. We're happy with that.
Yeah, we'll be okay with House of the Dragon. So they both end up with women that they really love. Samwise has a huge family. In the appendices, it talks about, like, I can't remember the name of his daughter, but she's, like, one of the most beautiful hobbits in all the Shire. He eventually becomes, like, the mayor or Thane or whatever the heck they call him. I forget. But he serves quite a few terms based on the appendices. So that's good for Sam. Samwell gets to be a maester by the end of the show, which is also pretty cool, and it seems like he's literally
the maester to Bran.
He's the Grand Maester to King Bran.
Right.
So that's
why King Bran needs a maester, I don't know.
Exactly.
But
King Bran can see everything. Why does he?
He has the best story because he has everyone's story.
Don't even. I'm literally just trying to talk about Sam.
Anyway, Sam's cool.
Both Sams are good.
They find their place at the end of the series.
Samwise is to be commended as one of the greatest hobbits to have ever lived, in my opinion, just because he is one of the only people in all of Middle-earth who takes the ring when Frodo is captured. And
not tempted to put it on at all.
Not tempted to put it on at all, and able to give it back.
Yeah, it was offered to him by Frodo.
Because that's the thing. And so when he finds Frodo in the tower and he gets him free. And he struggles a little bit, but that's mostly just the ring itself trying to work on him to sow that dissent.
Yeah.
But ultimately when Frodo's like, give me the ring back, Sam does give it back, and he does not fight him over it.
Yeah. Doesn't bite his finger off.
So ultimately the quest would have failed if Samwise had not been there, so thank God Smeagol's attempts to sow discord did not succeed. Otherwise we wouldn't have the ending that we got with Lord of the Rings. At least it's a very, very happy ending for all of our heroes in some way, shape, or form, with a little bit of that bitterness to it at the end. Kind of jumping ship here to so I wanted to talk about Aragorn because he's a very important protagonist. I would always say that his storyline is the most interesting and the most fun for me in the movies, but he doesn't have a one-to-one character in Thrones that I can compare him to.
Not really.
Because he's got like, Jon Snow has a bit of Aragorn in him, but the closest person I can even think of is old Boromir himself, Ned Stark.
Yeah.
Because Ned Stark is almost like that kingly,
honorable
protagonist that we want to root for, and obviously we find out some things about him that he's not as honorable as he seems. It kind of changes our perspective, subverts our expectations. But the closest I could even compare is just Ned Stark and Aragorn as these honorable men who were both famed fighters in their day. And willing to do anything for their friends. I mean, Ned Stark's whole thing is he couldn't say no to his best friend, and so he ends up becoming the Hand of the King, and that just leads to all the hijinks that eventually consume the entire series.
Yep.
So with Aragorn, I find him so much more compelling than Frodo. Not to say Frodo doesn't have good moments, but I find Aragorn so compelling because his whole struggle is he's fighting against his lineage. He's fighting against the fact that he is a descendant of Isildur who didn't have the wherewithal, the will to destroy the ring, and so that is what is causing all of the issues that they are facing today. If Isildur had actually destroyed the ring, there wouldn't be this War of the Ring, as they call it.
Yeah.
But also he's kind and he cares about his friends. The amount of anguish he shows throughout the series, and he just cares for people that he doesn't even know. One of my favorite scenes is in the extended version of Return of the King. They go through the mountain to find the army of the dead, and they come out the other side, and he looks down and he sees the Corsairs have destroyed a village, a Gondorian village. And by all means, like, obviously he knows he's the king. Would have been the king for these people if he had actually come out of hiding sooner. So he feels grief, and he just falls to his knees of just, oh my gosh, I failed. And he doesn't even need to say anything. It's a good moment for a king, in my opinion, because great kings care about the people that they are in charge of. And he just wishes he could have done that faster. And obviously he gets the army of the dead and eventually becomes the king of Gondor.
Another Army of the Dead. That's a fun parallel as well.
Except theirs is a good army.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Well, they weren't the greatest until they agreed. And
well, yeah, exactly. So because they abandoned Isildur in his time of need, and that's why they were cursed. But at least they were able to redeem themselves by fulfilling their vow to his descendant. But that's Aragorn is just.
He's a really well written character.
I enjoy him a lot. And I appreciate so much his understanding of people and understanding of his shortcomings and other people's strengths. The moment where Frodo is at Amon Hen, and it's right after Boromir has attacked Frodo to try and steal the ring, Aragorn comes up, and there's a lot of just unspoken things there, but ultimately Aragorn has to let Frodo go because he knows that the quest needs to succeed and the ring is going to try and tear people apart.
Yep.
So that also just it was in the same kind of vein as what Sam did, where it took a lot of that because you just knew that the ring was trying to influence that whole moment. And thankfully, Aragorn had the strength to resist and let Frodo be. Ned Stark, on the other hand, he has a lot of flaws in his one season of the show because he is a good man, but that goodness is taken so advantage of. And that's the thing with the not black and white world of Westeros, is that people will take advantage of your goodness, whether you expect them to be honorable or not. So his whole thing with Joffrey being, the son of Jaime and Cersei, and just his refusal to tell Robert about it, and to tell Cersei, I'm going to tell Robert, so get out of here, is like, what on earth are you doing, man?
Yeah, it's like, what do you think?
Especially when we the audience have seen some of the things Cersei's done. He's seen some of the things that Cersei's done. The whole trial after Nymeria bit Joffrey, and just her ruthlessness on like, well, we gotta kill one of the dire wolves, so kill Sansa's dire wolf that doesn't have anything to do with it. So he's seen some of these things, how she can just be ruthless, and he takes her at face value and doesn't immediately just get her killed. And that's the honorable way to go about it, but
there's no honor in King's Landing.
There's no honor in King's Landing. So with that, he makes a huge mistake.
And Littlefinger screwed up.
Don't even get me talking about Littlefinger.
Good old Littlefinger.
Good old Littlefinger.
Littlefinger and Varys are kind of like, early on too, the guy who rules Isengard.
Saruman.
He's a little bit like those two together are kind of like Saruman, and like they're tricky. They play a certain character and unveil their true colors, right?
Yeah.
Just without the magic.
One of my favorite things with Ned, and this was back before I knew that he died in the first season. Was so the moment that Robert basically leaves him in charge.
Yeah.
For a bit.
When he was like super injured.
Yeah. Was like this cool moment where I'm like, okay, somebody a little bit more kingly is now on the throne. Like maybe he's gonna
let's see what's gonna change.
Like maybe he's gonna do some good things before inevitably because I knew he was gonna die. I just didn't know it was literally in the first season. So I thought, okay, Ned Stark's currently the acting ruler. Let's see what good he can do. Can he be an Aragorn style king? Can he make the realm feel a little bit safer, a little bit better? And unfortunately, that was just not the case, because you have all of these bad actors within King's Landing who they want power for themselves, they want power for their dynasty, they want power for whatever reason they want it for. And they are going to take advantage of the fact that Ned Stark takes everybody's word face value.
Yeah, and Aragorn is kind of reminiscent of all the Starks that are asked to take power, because people understand that the Starks would be good rulers if they ever wanted to rule, but most of them didn't, outside of maybe Robert. Outside of Robert, who wanted to rob.
Oh, okay. I was like...
Yeah, Robb Stark.
Yeah, okay.
Who wanted to, avenge his father, take King's Landing.
Which even then, I wouldn't say that was him wanting to rule. That was literally just... And that's the thing, is so with the Starks, it always just feels like the power is thrust upon them, because you have Jon Snow, you had Robb Stark, who both of them have their King in the North moments.
Right. Bran is ultimately king, didn't want it as well, right?
That we're aware of.
And then, of course, father, come on.
Ned,
he had to be in a situation to try to take power from Cersei. It was illegitimate. Robert's last words were, hey, you need to do this, right? He didn't want
to. Which, of course, he gave...
He wanted to leave. He wanted to go home.
He would have preferred to be anywhere but King's Landing at that point.
He didn't want to go in the first place.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking in that moment, because obviously with the king's last words, he gives the envelope to Barristan the Bold, who, by all means, those are, in my opinion, the two most honorable people in the show at that moment.
Yep. Sure, Barristan.
And so it's like, of course, he gives it to Barristan, who nobody would question his honor or his words. And when Barristan then gives them to Cersei, of course, she rips it up, and he's like, those are the king's words. Why did you do that? And just showing once again that Ned Stark is in a realm that just he shouldn't be in.
Yeah.
In the first
if
place.
he was in the Game of Thrones world, which he was, different person.
Yeah.
He'd be a lot better off.
Yeah. So, trying to think.
Tyrion doesn't really have a comparison.
No,
It would have to be
Maybe Gimli.
maybe Legolas.
No, I wouldn't even call that.
There needs to be like an overly, intelligent character that, that kind of strategically works with words rather than like muscle. And, with the Fellowship, maybe Gandalf?
To that is Gandalf.
Yeah, Gandalf.
Because Gandalf is wise, but he's a wizard.
He's also very powerful.
And he's very old.
Mm-hmm.
So he's had a lot of experience. Tyrion...
I drink wine and I know things.
Tyrion, obviously the whole thing with him is that he reads books. He makes sure that he is intelligent because he is not of great stature, of great fighting prowess. So that's why I would just compare him and Gandalf at this point, is because they're both very intelligent. They both know what is going on in any given situation, and they both provide a lot of advice to kings.
Good counsel.
To kings. Especially.
And queens.
Kings and queens. So, with Tyrion, the first king he's an advisor for is obviously a little shithead who shouldn't have been king in the first place.
Slap him a few more times.
I've just smacked an idiot king or did my hand fall off. Whereas, at least with Gandalf, you don't need to worry about him hitting too many kings. The only time he even came close was when Theoden was possessed by Saruman, and he just is expelling him with his power.
He also got really mad at...
he got mad at Denethor, but that dude deserved it.
Well, no, the Merry, was it?
Pippin,
with the whole seeing Sauron and looking in the glass thing.
Yeah, he gets mad at him, but also he uses those mistakes that other people make to the advantage of whoever he is working for.
He finds a way.
Tyrion would do the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he gets a little bit of the dum-dum juice by 7 and 8.
But Gimli, Legolas, they're too muscle, like Bran maybe, and just the bodyguards of our characters really. I'm trying to think of places that Legolas and
Hodor is just Gimli and Legolas put together.
Right? There you go.
In a sense.
It's just
in an honor-bound way.
It's difficult to look at the bodyguards because you've got Game of Thrones, which is very political, and so your protagonists are much different than the protagonists of Lord of the Rings, which is more adventurous.
No, and that's the whole thing. Is so the whole quest for the protagonists of Lord of the Rings is a basic good and evil plot.
And it's a physical goal. Destroy a ring.
Right.
Yep.
Whereas Lord of the Rings...
This ring is the embodiment of evil because the main spirit that created this tied their life force to this thing.
Yep.
So we can just destroy this. And by destroying that ring, it will benefit everyone. It'll benefit the entire whole of Middle-earth. It's not so simple with Game of Thrones. If all of the houses send their military might to the wall to go and expunge the dead from the world, that might put them in a weak spot. Might put them behind. The whole thing with Cersei getting one up on Dany in season 7, season 8, is that she doesn't want to put herself in a position where she might lose a future war with Daenerys. So that's why she refuses to actually send any troops. Whereas with Lord of the Rings, most of the people who are not under Sauron's influence are just inherently allies with each other.
They all sent their best warriors.
They might have some distrust. You have the whole thing with the elves and the dwarves, and that's just generations of being that way. And we discussed that the elves were created by Eru Ilúvatar, whereas one of the other Maiar was one of the ones who created the dwarves. And so you just kind of have this weird, we're better than you supremacy that the elves have because they were created by the main creator.
Yeah.
So that just kind of ties into all of the lore there more so. But ultimately, everybody in Middle-earth will benefit from the ring being destroyed. You have too many other things that people want in Game of Thrones, and for better or for worse, I can't just judge who's good and who's evil, because that's not how Game of Thrones is.
Yeah, everyone's in the gray area.
Everybody's in this gray area where they just want what's best for themselves or their family. In some cases, at least with the familial stuff, I can get behind that a little bit more than, say, Cersei, who says she does it for her children, but then, blows up a sept and gets her son to commit suicide. So,
right.
that's a thing.
Or they do it for the oppressed masses, as Varys constantly says.
Yeah.
I work for the people of the realm, not the realm itself.
Trying to think, any other protagonists we really want, because those are the main people I could really talk about, and that they have like a very easy one-to-one.
I mean, there's some people I could mention, but then I think, well, they're more on the antagonist side.
Like in Thrones, you mean?
Well, we could talk about the Night King, how they parallel Sauron.
I'm thinking next time we talk about the
antagonists. And I think that's a good idea too.
Any other points you want to bring up, Ryan? Anything else, Alex?
I think that covers it for protagonists.
Without getting into my favorite characters who I feel like are protagonists, but really
I mean, by all means.
No, I don't want to get into the
Martells. I would say that the Martells are more protagonists than antagonists. If you want to talk about them, go ahead.
I feel like the Martells play a short story within a season, and it pains me that they don't get to play a larger role in the overarching story.
And by all means, we could get behind the protagonist vibe that Oberyn Martell gives off, because at this point, we do hate the Mountain. We want him to die. Yep. We do not like this guy at all.
And his fight is clearly...
And that's the other thing, is he's Tyrion's champion. He literally goes in to volunteer to be Tyrion's champion.
But as far as a parallel to Oberyn, I would say maybe the brother of Boromir, who kind of like...
Faramir?
Yeah, who tries to... he does his best, being told, that these are the odds he's not going to survive, and managing, and but the lone soldier to come back from that squabble in the ruins, but he lives.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could still appreciate his efforts, whereas everything should have gone right for Oberyn, and
everything should have, and everything was going right. If only he just not gloated so much.
Yeah.
Because,
But he drinks before a fight. He always drinks before a fight.
He always drinks. I forget about that sometimes.
Yeah, he's always drunk.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible idea.
Not exactly the best fighter.
Well, he never lost before. That was the whole thing with him.
He also never fought a mountain before.
Well, again, and to my point, he didn't lose. The Mountain was dead by all means with the poison that he put into him with those cuts and slices.
Exactly.
It's only for the nuisance that is
Qyburn.
Yeah, Qyburn and his disgusting experiments bringing something of the Mountain back.
Yeah.
It was a draw, which ultimately I would like to think Tyrion didn't deserve to be sentenced if it's a draw, but
wait, of course. Well,
right?
It was whoever went down first.
That's the thing.
So technically, it wasn't a draw.
Basically, whoever's heart stopped beating first.
So even if the Mountain died later,
he was
Oberyn definitely died
if
first.
Qyburn had actually not succeeded in keeping him alive, it would have still gone.
In the books, is he kept alive in that moment?
Yes.
Or does he die? Because
no.
With the show,
that's
it
the first
seems
time.
like he fully died.
No, yeah. So in the books, that's the first time where it's like, so you have Dragonfire, where it's like, or what was that? Wildfire. So you have Wildfire, and then you have the Mountain being kept alive, and that's like the first time, like in the book, where science is really like, hey, so you have magic. But then you have this other thing that people are discovering.
Qyburn's a big science guy.
So he's like, oh, magic can be explained.
The Mountain's alive in the books as well.
A shame.
But
he's not himself.
The funny thing is they allude to it because they call him Robert Strong the first time he's shown after Cersei's Walk of Shame in season 5. Which is what they call him, like the resurrected Mountain in the books. And then they just kind of, like, we called him that for one time, but it's just the Mountain. Mm-hmm. He's just the Mountain.
Yeah.
Since I let Alex have that moment there where he gets to at least shine some light on somebody he finds to be a protagonist, is there anybody you feel like you want to chat about, Ryan?
Tragic protagonist.
Well,
by all means.
like in Game of Thrones... There's, a number
There's
of
a
them.
lot of characters.
There's a lot of characters. It's just a lot of characters.
Is there anybody you want to cover that we may have skipped over a little bit? Because I focus on the people who are like the big
Endgame that are still alive by the end of the
big
series.
boys.
Yeah,
Right.
but at least you can talk about somebody who's dead, like over
Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Greyjoys are pretty great. I definitely see them as the most gray of all of the characters in Game of Thrones because they're literally like, no, we're going to do this for our house and no one else's house.
They're just going to do it for the Iron Islands and nobody else's
for our
benefits.
country.
Yeah, which is kind of similar to how the elves treat it, where it's like, we're going to do our own thing and it's just benefiting us and, you know, screw the rest of you guys. But no, not in terms of protagonists. I think there'll be more of an antagonist conversation for next time.
Okay.
They're kind of like the goblins.
Yeah, there's definitely...
You know what I mean? Like they kind of are. They're like the goblins. They're like,
welcome to Goblin Town.
it's like, we're going to do our own thing, and you know what? We're not going to be bothered by anybody. We're not going to join the bad guys or the good guys. We're going to do our own thing. And then, you know, there's the redhead uncle who comes in and is like, no, we're going to join the bad guys. But whatever.
Alrighty. Well, we'll definitely have plenty to talk about with the antagonists. I didn't want to get too deep into that because we have a lot of stuff to talk about with Cersei and plenty of other people. I didn't mention Dany much just because she's not really considered a protagonist by the end anymore, unfortunately.
Who's the girl that stabs the...
the Witch King, that's
King.
Éowyn.
Hey, there you go. Éowyn and Daenerys, maybe.
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Sorry, bud.
I'm just trying to think of a
Not
female
so
protagonist in Lord of the Rings. Because for the majority, that's what Daenerys is.
But she was also not introduced until pretty late.
True.
Pretty late in Lord of the Rings.
I can't think of
I
another...
mean, Two Towers.
Yeah.
I can't think of another female protagonist, though.
Well, she's like the only female
That's all
in Lord of the Rings.
That's all I'm
Éowyn
saying.
is probably more comparable to Arya. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Both women
Oh, yeah.
who want to be fighters and the society.
Go against the societal
So
norm.
I was gonna say we'll just cover that really quick. Arya and Éowyn are probably the closest in my opinion because of the fact that they're both these women who want to be fighters. Éowyn wanted to actually be fighting in the Battle of Helm's Deep. She did do a little bit in some deleted scenes and in the actual material because when the Uruks broke through the wall, they obviously were working their way into the glaring caves where the women and children are at. So she got to kill a couple of those, I'm sure. And then she disguises herself. That's actually appropriate.
Yeah.
She disguises herself as one of the Rohirrim when they go to break the siege at Minas Tirith, and she was... Basically, at that point, Éowyn was looking for a glorious death on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, Aragorn had broken her heart and said, you know, I like elf women more. So that was just sad for her. Eventually, she finds love in the arms of Faramir, so good for her. There is no what's west of Middle-earth for her.
Yeah.
Because we already know what's west of Middle-earth. Arya is the same way, where she's the daughter of a High Lord, and she does not wish to be like her sister Sansa. She wants to be a warrior, she wants to be a fighter, and her whole struggle throughout the show is learning how to be that warrior, and eventually she becomes the one who kills the Night King. Éowyn stabs the Witch King. It's kind of poetic, and the fact that those two have that kind of a similarity. The Witch King was lauded as somebody that no man could kill, so some fluke in the prophecy allows him to be killed by a woman, so that's whatever.
There you go.
Force is female.
Sure. Okay.
Rey Skywalker.
Don't even get me started on Star Wars.
That's a big oof.
Yeah. So no, Arya.
Actually,
it's
a surprisingly nice connection.
That's a very good connection there on that. Arya obviously goes and does her own thing at the end of the series. Éowyn lives the happy life in Gondor with Faramir. So I'll at least give Arya this. She didn't need no man to be happy.
Take that.
She ain't need no man.
So,
take that, Baratheon boy.
So take that.
Gendry.
I literally almost just called him Podrick, and I'm like, no.
Those are slightly different characters.
Pod the Rod does not get to be married because he's a Kingsguard.
Pod the Rod, he's definitely he's Merry and Pippin.
Sure.
Literally.
I think that Pippin and Gren are more like Merry and Pippin. Let's be real.
A bit more.
So anyway, sorry, not main protagonists anymore on those guys.
Helpful,
Helpful, but not protagonists. All right. Well, next time we will cover some antagonists, and we'll probably go in depth a lot more on the Game of Thrones side because we got a lot of people we can talk about.
A lot of antagonists.
And with those, they're not as simple to compare 1-to-1 on Lord of the Rings. So we will talk about that next time. Thank you for tuning in and listening. We'll see you next time. Hit that like button.